Yeah, a bit of background and I'll crack in. I realise attention spans are probably waning, and I promise you there's only 4 slides here, so this can be as long as short as you probably depict. But as Scott's describing, I'm an end user. As we go through, I would encourage questions. As I say, there's experience here, but it's only experience. There's no right or wrong. This is the journey I've found. And just as a bit of a background there, I spent sort of 10-ish years in blue chip pharmaceutical companies where we had loads of money. It was a marketeering dream. Research, focus groups, CRMs that worked, people that managed databases for us. And it was great. And I often wonder why I left it, but I did. And I returned back to Scotland and I got involved in a couple of businesses over the last year, all in the S&M side of things, so small and medium-sized businesses. Very diverse, a law firm, a software company, and now where I am, which Neil Armstrong Space Solutions, you really couldn't script that. But what do we do? We're commercial property solutions of an end. So very diverse businesses, but actually with an amazing amount in common with each other in terms of the marketing challenges and in a certain respect, sales challenges. So can I ask, has anyone recently moved to a new business? Great. So some experience there. So I've only recently just joined Space, 2 months in the door, and Space is actually the 3rd company I've been with in about the last 5 years. And so in the interview process you go through, clearly they're selling the business to you, you hear all these fantastic things about the business, I want to work there, you do your due diligence, company's house records maybe, word of mouth in the community, you decide, you arrive, and then you do your sort of secondary discovery. And to me, let's stop the button. That one. Which one? Oh, thank you very much. This is kind of what I've tended to find along the way. This is not supposed to be a kind of combative situation. It's just a cloud of activity. Occasional arms and legs, the odd cup of tea. But generally speaking, there's an awful lot that tends to be going on in these businesses, and everyone wants to tell you about it. So it takes you a couple of weeks to really get to the nuts and bolts. On the right is the kind of descriptions that you have. We have this wonderful sort of clear objectives and strategies, and from the basis of that we're very clear as to what we want marketing to deliver. And on the back of that we have sort of materials, but really we'd like to see a bit more of our collateral for the sales team and our prospect database. It's wonderful, and all these things. In the reality, what I would tend to do is actually convert those all to the negative. That's usually the reality of what I find, and that's not to say the company is bad or poor or the leaders are not right, but there's challenges in there. If I ask them what the objectives are, they're usually financial, and that's great. You know, we'd like to achieve £1 million profitability or 40 million turnover. Brilliant. What are we going to do to achieve that? Don't have any objectives around that. So if we don't have any objectives, how do we really define what the strategies are? And that then links to a really clear point under understanding the marketing function. It's one of my sort of beliefs that, or if there's something I could do in a legacy way, it would actually shave off the ing of marketing and just get back to talking about the market. And think about marketing as a precursor to the sales, rather than actually where I tend to find it, which is more of a sales support function. Sales turning around and saying, oh, we need some collateral, or we need your input into a tender, we need it to be pretty. Does that really add value? If I take a to-do list that I'm given from some of my teams and I say, look, if we tear this up and put it in the bucket, what will the impact be on the business really? Some few frustrated people, I'm sure, but it's not mission critical, is it? And that's not a great place to be from a marketing perspective. We want to be adding value. Knowledge of the market, again, usually very ethereal. Gut instincts normally led us into that position. It's probably started with an owner-manager, or there's a senior person at the helm of the business that's been part of the business for so long that knows it all, and there's this cascade of knowledge. But when you begin to sort of really pick into this in terms of who is our actual market, who are the groups of people that we should talk to, who are the stakeholders, how many are there? You know, how many customers should we be targeting? Normally there's a lot of silence around the table at this point, and that's quite a disturbing place to be. And finally, well, sorry, not finally, prospect databases. I'm just going to say normally there's none. It's usually a sales ledger database or a customer database, however we want to phrase it, but in terms of actually being able to define prospects, they've bought a list. We talked about spam and ranking on spam filters. That's usually happened at some point. Why? Because we bought a list, we've sent it out, it's a lot of info ads, we get a lot of bounce. very little traction, and of course, because we get no result, dismissed. It's a poor activity, it doesn't deliver anything. So there's a lot of challenges in there. And the final one is the sales process. I say process optimistically. Normally I go back to this cloud, it's a lot of activity happening, and sure there's a lot of effort and there's a lot of positivity, is that a word? But what do we really see? Is it structured? Can you see a pipeline of activity drifting through? Frustratingly, no. And if I start backwards, revenue. You know, that's the thing we're trying to deliver at the end of the day. Everything's about delivering revenue, but what delivers revenue? It's converting opportunities. And so for converting opportunities, we've got to identify an opportunity first of all. And that usually comes from actually interrogating a lead. Sounds very aggressive, but you know what I mean, qualifying it. So if we go back to that, if we want to increase revenue and we want to identify more opportunities, well, wait a minute, sales process. We haven't got any more leads to go to. We haven't got a prospect data to harvest or farm. So that's where the stress really starts. We're just looking at actually a calculation of probably recurring business from a current customer stream. And if you look at it, there's probably very little new client acquisition happening. That's because they don't have a marketing engine that's actually delivering the things they need. So in order to kind of, does any of that sound familiar? Just particularly for the people that have gone to new businesses, but for those that are kind of in businesses and maybe have been there for a while, is that resonating in any way? Maybe a show of hands if yes, and maybe, oh great, good, we're all on the same page, right? So the businesses I've just left was an interesting business. I described it as the oldest startup in the world because actually the business was about 20, 25 years old, but about 4 years before I joined it, through an interesting opportunity with a client, they'd moved into more of what software development. So from this point on, I'm going to call it a software company, just so it sounds sexy. And the first product that they were developed was Foresight, and it was about 4 years old. It had been on the market, and there was no marketing activity behind it, or at least nothing you could really point to any value around. There was no real sales team. It's very ad hoc and opportunistic, and really relying on word of mouth referral. It actually had been a great product in its day, but unfortunately, competition had come into the marketplace and it was really struggling a little bit. Classically, no prospect database to look at. As I said, no real marketing activity, no real insight, objective, strategy about how we're going to deliver it, kind of a bit of chaos. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we had opt-enroll. Now this was to do with pension auto-enrollment, something very topical at the moment, high pressured. We were going to target IFAs with this. And when I joined, this product didn't even exist yet. It was still conceptual. So, two products, one a kind of a bit of what I would like to say a cash cow, but no it wasn't. And the other one which was kind of the new hope, how are we going to deliver on that? And in my journey, I arrived with no marketing resource at all in terms of administration or people or team. There was no marketing plan, there was no data, there was nothing, so pretty frightening. But along the way, from my pharmaceutical days and then the legal days, I'd had this vision about what we've described in base roots, marketing automation, lead generation, lead nurturing, that marketing should be doing an awful lot more. I began to build the business case, not knowing about platforms like Sales Fusion, Marketo. I began to build the business case for how can I build this machine, this thing that's going to actually target, build out prospect databases, send them lots of communications, we'll measure this. And the original budget I came up with was about 120 grand. Sounds like quite a lot, but that did include 2 salaries in there because there was an awful lot of human administrative effort involved in this. There were spreadsheets, as we've talked about. They were using sort of data mailing platforms, email platforms. The budget wasn't the problem, really. I mean, it took some convincing, but eventually I got some sign-off. The problem was I couldn't recruit the people, without having to invest an incredible amount of time and effort in skilling them up. So what was the real critical obstruction here? It was time. I mean, this was going to be 6 months to a year before we were anywhere near it. So I went back to revisit this problem, and what do? You phone a friend. You ask around, and eventually I was introduced to Scott, and one coffee later, the mention of things such as lead nurturing, etc., had launched me into a whole educational pathway. So if we go back to the funnel, we've got awareness, education, consideration, and decision. I was now at the awareness stage. Suddenly I was peaked. This is it. This is exactly what I want. So a bit of education later, on the internet, deciding what we're going to do. And what became clear was, again, things were time critical. that I needed support to deliver on that. And that's where Scott and I began our relationship in terms of working together, because Scott had the knowledge about how to deliver a lot of these things, but I needed to make a decision about the platform. So again, we did a bit of an audit. Unfortunately, hopefully I don't cause any offence with this, I was tied to Dynamics as our CRM system. And in considering other things such as Marketo and Pardot, which I've been, until today, been calling Pardo, so correction there. And there were other options as well I looked at, but the trouble was these were so big, they were huge, you know, and they were scary. And Sales Fusion came on the screen and in my research. And in all ways, I mean, priced in the middle category, so it wasn't going to break the bank. It seemed technically sound. It actually looked like a great user interface, and it didn't scare me. And I sat there and I thought, right, and I readdressed that business case. And again, I recognised I would need an administrator to help me, because there is a manual effort to delivering this. And as you scale up the teams, it's interesting to look at where actually you should be putting your numbers in terms of people. That's for another discussion altogether. But the point was, I knew I needed at least one person to help me on this journey. So my budget suddenly dropped. You know, in terms of the business case, I was now down to about 75,000. Now, that might sound a lot, and it can take a lot of convincing, but the point here was this was all about being able to scale things. If it was working, let's do more of it. If it wasn't working, let's dial it down. You know, we don't have to continue. We're not committed. It's a month-on-month contract, more or less. You know, the salary side of things was actually covered a lot by Scottish Enterprise, who, you know, you said, I've got an initiative, will you support me in this? So there were all sorts of ways about taking that budget down. And the important thing was that I wasn't just adding new costs, I was taking costs out. So things like PR, which we were spending a fortune on and achieving absolutely nothing. Advertising, nothing. You know, all these things were not leading to opportunity. They were just noise and a hassle and distraction and taking up the capacity of a very limited team as it was. So we were taking those costs and reallocating to more of a priority. So then the implementation phase came along. I've talked about using Scott, sorry to put you in such a way, using you, but as a team, and a lot of his team are at the back here, you know, we engaged. What were the needs at that point? Well, I didn't have any knowledge of the platform really. Sales Fusion did a great job in training you up as you embark, but we needed to hit the ground running and we needed it now. The other part about this was building our prospect database. And so, you know, we didn't need 4,000 contacts all at once. What we began to do was drip them in. As we discovered them, they popped in. Because the system is automated, it just begins to generate the content that goes out. So as we looked on a monthly basis, and someone talked about reporting, what we were seeing was additionally, you know, 400 contacts going in every week. Out of that, how many were engaging with our first emails? After that, how many people were beginning to be, and then the points and prizes. So we began to be able to grade people out to level of activity. So actually the scary machine that I hadn't really got involved in wasn't that scary after all. It was quite common sense once you got yourself into it. And I think that was one of the real sort of developments as I discovered it, that this wasn't, it looks like rocket science. I mean, quite frankly, some of the slides that have been up today, you think, oh, but actually it's not. And you know an awful lot of this already. It's just actually about putting it into action and system. And this is what this does. And it's not about building it all today and it has to be perfect today. You can add and evolve and create. And that's, I think, possibly, I've not actually understood the gym reference all along, but my point is that it does evolve as you evolve and your understanding of your customers evolve and winning of that customer. So the results of that were actually really interesting. Foresight. I've talked about that budget that I sort of looked at for 12 months of £75,000 from them. Foresight was an interesting one because we identified through all the research that we were doing that there were probably going to be something like 4,000 targets that we wanted to do. This is the hotels, hotel-specific software. 4,000 hotels in the UK that we were trying to target. Now, in there we thought there would be about 4 stakeholders, and we classified them, and we knew what their pains were, and we profiled them, and we did that. It really wasn't that hard. It just took a bit of time and effort. So every hotel, we reckon there were between 4 and 6 different stakeholders. So you can see that there's thousands of prospects that we were developing as we went along. But what we quite quickly learned, I mean, within a couple of months, was actually that 4,000 weren't 4,000 at all. It was 1,000. Because of the complexities of the hotel market, the ownership structures, the management structures, this interlocking between the two, there was actually really only about 1,000 target businesses, hotels, and then the decision makers within that. So we learned an awful lot very quickly, and then when we began to do our ROI in terms of conversions, they weren't particularly high. So suddenly we had a real challenge, 1,000 targets and not a lot of conversions. And at this point in time, that product has actually been parked. It's not stopped, we're servicing the customers that we have, but there wasn't an awful lot of growth left to be seen. Particularly when we looked at what we learned from the opt-in-roll. Opt-in-roll, as I said, pension auto-enrollment, big buzz thing out there. Basically, there's a need. And possibly one of the most rewarding moments of my marketing career was we sent out the first sort of batch of white papers, sort of authoritative pieces addressing the pains, challenges, and the phone rang. We didn't just get email responses, the actual phone rang, and someone said, I'm really interested to speak to someone about this. It's never happened before. How easy is this? And I mean, I don't work with the business anymore, but I think I'm right in saying that continues to this day. Why? Because we learnt about the buying cycle. The foresight buying cycle could take anywhere between 1 and 7 years. That's a long time. The optimal buying cycle, there's an urgency, there was a need. They needed to know now. And it just so happened that the materials that we were sending out, the content that we were sending them, resonated with that need. And so they were engaging with that need right there and then. So, 2 different products, same business, different databases, but the same process undertaken. And of course, the benefit was that we started with foresight and then we scaled into optimal. So the knowledge was increasing all the time. So a pseudo summary slide. I think taking responsibility, these are sort of bold challenges coming out at the moment, but I think probably the first thing I would say in terms of taking responsibility is define expectations. And it sounds a really simple thing to do, and it is actually. What do sales expect from marketing? What do marketing expect from sales? They're not separate teams. You're all working to achieve the same thing, which is conversion of opportunity, to identify opportunity, to identify a lead. You know, if you do your job right, sales bits gets easier, and if sales feedback from their side of things, or the profile's not quite right, the content's not quite right, they're not engaging in content, or blah, blah, then you can refine that too. So there is this link that has to be there. But quite simply put, my personal belief is that marketing, main remit, is to identify marketing qualified leads, and we've talked about what that is. It's targeted activity, and that target engaging with content. And if they do that, that looks like a marketing qualified lead. Hand it to sales. Sales then have to qualify that, and if it's an opportunity, it goes forward. If it's not, then you're talking about nurturing. So that's probably the main thing I would say about taking responsibility. The other thing is obviously, as we move forward in this, that because you're at the beginning of this cascade, that however you're marketing it in your CRM, MA for marketing automation as lead source, or an email campaign or whatever that you're doing, you're actually able to convert or tangibly report back to what you're delivering in terms of revenue to the business. So yes, sales still have to do their bit, but you can point at how that's coming from the work and effort that you're putting in at the beginning. And so that conversion sits there, and actually it's a very nice thing to sit down and justify a budget in terms of, well, for every £1 you're giving me, I'm giving you 50 back, or 20, 10, whatever the ratio might be. How many more would you like? Let's do some multiples. So that's really sort of about the value. The commercial success is really leans towards using what we've talked about to be able to sort of identify what works and what doesn't. This isn't about setting a process in play and not thinking about it ongoing. This is about taking a process and adapting it. And whether your lead nurture stuff is emails, which we've heavily talked about, but equally it could be about events or webinars or social media posts, understanding which channels are working, and then if it's working, do more of it. And if that reaches a capped point or a plateau, try something else. So being able to make that decision quickly is what I mean by commercial success. And then scale. As I've talked about, if it's working, ramp it up. If it's not, ramp it down. If sales are struggling, if there's a block there, tone it down a wee bit. If they're looking for more, improve it. So again, this goes back to an understanding and a balance of what the sales process is, how you're feeding into it, how the whole thing works collectively. It's not a journey that marketing takes on its own. It really, at the end of the day, links in with the overall business strategies and objectives. It's a good graphic, isn't it? what do I mean by that? Rather than get your ducks in a line, I think probably in conclusion, we've heard an awful lot today, and I've taken a lot of notes at the back. The journey always continues. I think it can be quite overwhelming when you're starting at the beginning. I don't know how you're feeling. I mean, I've been through this process once, twice, and I'll be certainly utilising the same process at Space. But I think this is about simplifying things down. You know, how do you eat an elephant in small bites? Or to use an analogy, rather than getting your ducks lined up, just get them in the pond. You know, start making some decisions about what platforms you may or may not fit what you're trying to do. Start thinking about what activities you're currently doing that maybe are just a distraction and not really adding. You know, think about some of the objectives that the business had, or if they don't have objectives, challenge on that. And I think at the end of the day, what am I undertaking in now, having gone through it at least once? I'm looking at sort of taking those raw assets that I need. I need my website to be in the right sort of format to make a great impression, because there's no doubt about it, it's the landing site I'm directing everyone to. I'm thinking about the brand, and does that represent actually what I want in terms of the business I'm working for. I'm thinking about all these little elements that you want to get in play. It doesn't have to be perfect today, but it has to be thereabouts. And as you begin to go through this process, you'll refine. And I think that's probably what I mean in conclusion about just get your ducks in the pond, limit the focus that you have to have at the moment, and then concentrate on those elements so it allows you to deliver. So that's my experience kind of to date, but me tell you stuff, but if anyone's got any questions, I'll try and expand on some of that. Stand silent.